The courtroom of Judge Mildred Wagner was her kingdom. She was judge, jury, and often executioner, especially for those she deemed unfit. When Darius Washington, a black man in a slightly rumpled suit, stood before her for a simple traffic warrant, she saw only what her prejudice allowed: another criminal. She decided to make an example of him. She refused to listen. She sentenced him to 48 hours in jail for contempt. But what Judge Wagner didn't know was that the man she was trying to imprison was not just an innocent citizen. He was the most powerful lawyer in the city. And her new boss, Courtroom 3B of the Kings County Courthouse, was not just a room. It was a monument to Judge Mildred Wagner. The oak walls, darkened by a century of grim pronouncements, were scrubbed and polished weekly. The brass railing separating the gallery from the bar gleamed under the cold fluorescent lights. Even the air felt curated, heavy with the scent of old paper, floor wax, and the metallic tang of absolute, unquestionable authority. And at the center of this universe, perched high on her judicial throne, sat Judge Wagner. In her late 60s, Wagner was a woman forged from old money and brittle ideology. Her silver hair was perpetually locked in a severe bun, and her robes, always impeccably starched, seemed more like armor than attire. In the courthouse hallways, she was known as Mildred the Mauler, a nickname spoken only in whispers. She believed in order, in breeding, and in the cleansing power of swift, merciless judgment. Her grandfather, Judge Theodore Wagner, had presided over this same bench, and Mildred saw herself as the righteous heir to a legacy of stamping out the element that she believed was perpetually eroding society. Her morning docket was, in her eyes, a parade of human failings: drunk drivers, petty thieves, sobbing mothers, and defiant young men. She viewed them all with the same icy disdain. "Next case," she droned, not looking up from her papers. "Docket 88B, the People versus Washington." Her bailiff, a burly, long-suffering man named Frank Gibbons, announced. "Counsel?" Wagner's voice snapped like a whip. A young woman with tired eyes and a polyester suit stood up. "Anna Shapiro, Your Honor, from the Public Defender's Office. My client is here on a bench warrant for a failure to appear on a traffic violation." A failure to appear. Wonderful. Wagner finally looked up, her gaze scanning the courtroom. "Well, where is he? Don't tell me he's failed to appear for his failure to appear. The audacity is almost impressive." "He is here, Your Honor. He was detained at the security checkpoint," Shapiro said, her voice tight. "Detained? At security? Figures." The side door opened, and Deputy Gibbons led a man to the defendant's table. He was a tall black man, athletic in build. He wore a dark grey suit, expensive but disheveled, as if he had been sleeping in it. His tie was loosened at the collar. He looked focused, his expression a mask of controlled frustration. This was Darius Washington. Judge Wagner stared at him. She didn't just look, she inspected. Her eyes took in his dark skin, his short, neat dreadlocks, his rumpled suit. Her lip curled, an almost microscopic movement, but one that Anna Shapiro, Frank Gibbons, and everyone in the gallery recognized instantly. It was the look, the "here we go" look. Wagner's internal monologue began, a venomous whisper that fueled her judicial persona. "Look at this. The arrogance. Strutting in here in a $5,000 suit he probably bought with stolen money, thinking he's above the law. He can't even be bothered to show up for a simple ticket. This is the rot. This is the disrespect I fight every single day." "So," Wagner said, her voice dripping with condescension, "you are Mr. Washington." Darius Washington stood tall. "Yes, Your Honor. There seems to be a significant misunderstanding regarding—" "Silence!" The word cut through the air. It wasn't a request. It was a command that echoed off the high ceilings. "You do not speak in my courtroom unless I give you permission to speak," Wagner spat. "You are a defendant. You have a lawyer. She will speak for you. And frankly, given your failure to appear, your credibility is already zero. Ms. Shapiro, what possible excuse does your client have for wasting this court's time?" Anna Shapiro gripped her lectern. "Your Honor, Mr. Washington was not properly served. The original summons was sent to an address he hasn't lived at in over 3 years. The ticket itself was for a vehicle he sold in 2022. He was here this morning of his own free will to clear up this clerical error when the outstanding warrant, which he was unaware of, was flagged at security." Wagner let out a sound that was almost a laugh. A clerical error. How convenient. The old "it wasn't me" defense. I've heard it 1,000 times. "Your Honor, I have the bill of sale right here," Shapiro insisted, waving a paper. Wagner waved her hand dismissively, not even glancing at the document. "I don't care about your paperwork. I care about the fact that a warrant was issued, and it was ignored. It shows a fundamental lack of respect for the law." "Your Honor, that is demonstrably false," Darius said, his voice low and firm. He couldn't help himself. Wagner's eyes flashed with genuine fury. "Did I give you permission to speak, Mr. Washington? Did I? Or are you, as I suspect, one of those men who believes his own voice is more important than the rules of this institution?" "Mildred, no," Frank Gibbons whispered under his breath from his desk, so quietly no one could hear. He had been staring at the man. He recognized him from the newspaper, but his brain couldn't make the connection fast enough. He had tried to get the judge's attention before the man was brought out, but she had been in one of her moods. "Your Honor," Darius tried again, "I am an officer of the court. I was just trying to—" This was the final straw for Wagner. The insolence. "You are not an officer of the court," she thundered, slamming her hand on her desk. "You are a defendant in my courtroom. How dare you impersonate a lawyer? That is a criminal offense in itself. Ms. Shapiro, control your client or I will hold you both in contempt." Anna Shapiro looked at Darius, her eyes wide with panic. She had no idea what he was talking about, but she knew he had just sealed his fate. "Judge, please," Shapiro begged. "My client simply meant—" "I know what he meant," Wagner said, her face a mask of cold rage. "He meant to lie. He meant to intimidate. He meant to play games. And I do not play games." She leaned forward, her eyes locking onto Darius. "I see you, Mr. Washington. I see you clearer than you think. You believe you can swagger in here, disrespect my authority, and walk out. You are mistaken." A suffocating silence fell over courtroom 3B. The only sound was the frantic scratching of a pen from the press row, where a young reporter named Ben Carter was scribbling notes so fast his knuckles were white. He couldn't believe what he was witnessing. Darius Washington took a slow, deep breath. He held his hands loosely at his sides. He had faced down murderers in interrogation rooms. He had argued before the Supreme Court. He had never, in his entire professional life, been treated with such naked, unprocessed contempt. His anger was a cold, hard stone in his stomach, but he knew that showing it would be like throwing gasoline on a fire. "Your Honor," he said, his voice devoid of all emotion, "if you would just look at the file, or allow me to present my identification. The warrant is for a Darius L. Washington. My name is Darius James Washington. The date of birth is incorrect. He's trying to play lawyer again, Ms. Shapiro." Wagner's voice was triumphant. She saw this as a confession, a pathetic attempt to wriggle free on a technicality. "Arguing about middle initials, the desperation. I am not interested in your games, sir." "This isn't a game, Your Honor," Anna Shapiro pleaded, her voice cracking. "This is a simple case of mistaken identity. He's not even the right person. Judge, please, just read the file." "I have read enough," Wagner declared. She snapped the file shut. "What I have before me is a man who has shown zero respect for this court. He failed to appear. He was detained at security, likely causing a disturbance. He has interrupted me, a sitting judge, twice, and he has falsely claimed to be an officer of the court. He is, in short, in contempt." "Your Honor, no," Shapiro cried out. "Be silent, Ms. Shapiro, or you will be next." Wagner pointed a long, bony finger at Darius. "Mr. Washington, I find your behavior insulting. I find your presence an affront to the dignity of this institution. You need to learn a lesson about respect. You need to understand that the law is not something you can just talk your way out of." She relished this moment. This was why she was here, to bring the arrogant crashing down to earth. "I am finding you in summary contempt of court," she announced, "and for the original warrant, I am setting bail at $5,000. $5,000? Shapiro gasped. "For a parking ticket?" "But that," Wagner continued, a small, cruel smile playing on her lips, "can wait. The contempt charge must be served first. I sentence you, Darius Washington, to 48 hours in the Kings County Jail, effective immediately." The gallery erupted in gasps. Ben Carter, the reporter, nearly dropped his phone. 48 hours. For this. "Your Honor, this is unconscionable," Shapiro yelled, abandoning all pretense of decorum. "You cannot do this. It is a gross abuse of power." "Deputy Gibbons," Wagner roared, pointing at Shapiro. "Escort Ms. Shapiro from my courtroom. She is in contempt as well. Hold her in the back." "And Deputy," Wagner added, her voice dropping to a near whisper as she stared at Darius, "take this defendant into custody. I want him processed. I want him in a cell before lunch." Frank Gibbons rose from his chair. His face was pale. He had been a bailiff for 20 years. He had seen Wagner be cruel. But this was a new level. He knew, instinctively, that something was terribly wrong. He had seen the name Washington on the internal memo that morning, the one about the new DA. But the memo had said DJ Washington. This defendant was Darius Washington. He hadn't put it together, and now he was being ordered to jail him. "Your Honor," Gibbons said, his voice trembling slightly, Perhaps we should take a 5-minute recess, just to review the file one more time." Wagner's eyes narrowed to slits. "Are you questioning my order, Deputy?" "No, Your Honor. It's just, I think there might be. I gave you a direct order. Arrest that man." Gibbons swallowed. He put his hand on his service weapon, a reflexive habit, and unclipped the strap on his holster. He looked at Darius Washington, who was just watching him. Not with fear, not with anger, with pity. Gibbons took one step toward the defendant's table, and at that exact moment, the main doors of courtroom 3B at the far end of the gallery burst open with a crash that shook the very walls. In Judge Wagner's courtroom, no one entered without permission. No one ran. No one shouted. The crashing of the main doors was such a profound violation of her world that for a second she was too stunned to even be angry. All heads snapped to the back. Standing in the doorway, flanked by 2 stone-faced courthouse marshals, was a man who commanded authority in a way Wagner only pretended to. He was Judge Leonard Hoffman, the presiding judge of the Kings County Superior Court. Hoffman was a tall, broad-shouldered man in his 70s, a former Marine whose judicial temperament was famously patient, but whose wrath was legendary. He was, in effect, the only person in the building who was Mildred Wagner's boss. His eyes scanned the room, his face a mask of thunder. The gallery, which had been murmuring, went dead silent. "Judge Hoffman!" Wagner sputtered, rising from her chair. "What is the meaning of this? I am in the middle of a sentencing. This is my courtroom." Judge Hoffman ignored her completely. His gaze was fixed on the scene at the front. Anna Shapiro, being held by the arm by a confused deputy. Frank Gibbons, hand on his gun, frozen between the bench and the defendant. And Darius Washington, standing calmly at the table. "Everyone, sit down." Hoffman's voice boomed, low and resonant. It wasn't a request. He strode down the central aisle, his hard-soled shoes clicking with sharp, angry precision on the marble floor. He didn't stop at the gallery rail. He unlatched the swinging gate and entered the bar, a space reserved only for counsel and court staff. He walked directly past the prosecution and defense tables, right up to the small podium where Darius Washington stood. Wagner watched, her mouth agape. "Leonard, what are you doing? That man is a defendant. He is in custody." Hoffman finally turned his head, pinning Judge Wagner to her chair with a look of such concentrated fury that she physically recoiled. "You," he said to her, his voice quiet, but carrying more menace than her loudest shout, "will be silent." He then turned to Darius Washington. The anger melted from his face, replaced by an expression of profound, almost paternal apology. "Mr. Washington," Judge Hoffman said, extending his hand, "I am so terribly sorry. There was a complete breakdown in communication. Your new ID badge hadn't been activated in the system. The security team at the front gate followed protocol for a warrant, but they were supposed to call my office, not detain you and send you here." Wagner's brain stalled. "New ID badge? My office? What is he talking about?" "It's quite all right, Judge Hoffman," Darius said, his voice still preternaturally calm as he shook the presiding judge's hand. "It's been illuminating." "I'll just bet it has." Hoffman turned to the stunned bailiff. "Deputy Gibbons, release Ms. Shapiro, and for God's sake, man, take your hand off your weapon." Gibbons, blushing crimson, immediately unhooked his thumb and stepped back. "Yes, Judge." Anna Shapiro stumbled forward, rubbing her arm, looking utterly bewildered. "Judge Hoffman," Wagner tried again, her voice now high and thin, "I don't understand. This man has a warrant. He was disrespectful. He lied about being an officer of the court." Judge Hoffman turned his full body to face the bench. He looked up at Mildred Wagner, his face etched with a disappointment, so deep it was terrifying. "He didn't lie, Mildred." Hoffman's voice filled the cavernous room. "This man," he said, gesturing to Darius, "is Darius James Washington. He is a graduate of Yale Law School. He is a former U.S. attorney for the Southern District of New York. He is the man who successfully prosecuted the entire Petrova organized crime family, a case you taught a seminar on last spring." A collective gasp sucked the air from the gallery. Anna Shapiro's hand flew to her mouth. Ben Carter, the reporter, was already texting his editor. "Holy shit." Wagner's face went from pink to a chalky, mottled white. Her eyes darted from Hoffman to Darius as if seeing him for the first time, the rumpled suit, the exhaustion. He hadn't been sleeping in his suit because he was homeless. He had been sleeping in it because he'd just gotten off a red-eye flight from D.C. "The warrant," Hoffman continued, his voice like a hammer striking an anvil, "was, as Ms. Shapiro tried to tell you, a clerical error for a car he sold 3 years ago. A mistake he was coming here to clear up as a courtesy before his 10 a.m. meeting." Wagner was shaking her head, a jerky, spastic movement. 10. 10 to an a.m. meeting? With who? Judge Hoffman took a small, deliberate step closer to her bench. He looked up at her, his eyes cold. With me, Mildred, and the rest of the judiciary. He let the silence hang for 3 long, agonizing seconds. Allow me, Judge Hoffman said, his voice ringing with formal, terrible clarity, to properly introduce you to your new colleague. Judge Wagner, meet Chief Prosecutor Darius Washington. He was unanimously approved by the Governor's Commission last month. As of 9 a.m. this morning, he is the head of the District Attorney's office for this entire county. The office that argues every single case in your courtroom. The world stopped. For Judge Mildred Wagner, the polished oak, the gleaming brass, the very air of her kingdom, suddenly dissolved. The thug, the liar, the defendant she had just sentenced to jail, was the new chief prosecutor. He was, in the intricate ecosystem of the courthouse, the single most powerful attorney in the building. He controlled the budget, the cases, and the lawyers who would stand before her every day. Her mind, a fortress of supreme confidence, just moments before, shattered into 1,000 panicked pieces. No, it's not possible. But the face of Judge Hoffman, rigid with anger, and the calm, steady gaze of Darius Washington confirmed the impossible. She had just tried to jail her new chief prosecutor. I, she stammered, her hands gripping the side of her bench. She looked like a drowning woman searching for a piece of wreckage. I did not know. He didn't identify himself. He tried, Your Honor. Anna Shapiro's voice, no longer pleading but sharp with vindication, cut through the silence. He told you he was an officer of the court, and you called him a liar. He tried to explain, and you told him to be silent. You wouldn't even look at his paperwork. Ms. Shapiro is correct, Judge Hoffman affirmed. We have the transcript. He nodded to the court reporter, who was pale and staring straight ahead, her fingers frozen on her keys. Wagner looked desperately at Darius. Mr. Prosecutor, Washington, this is a misunderstanding, a simple error. Darius Washington had not moved. He had not smiled. He had not gloated. He simply stood, a pillar of stillness, and watched her implode. When he finally spoke, his voice wasn't loud, but it carried to every corner of the room. Your Honor, he said, the title now dripping with a terrible, formal irony. I believe you were in the middle of sentencing me for contempt. This simple statement was the final blow. It was the sound of the trap springing. It highlighted the absurd, catastrophic scope of her error. She hadn't just been wrong. She had been tyrannically wrong. She had been so blinded by her own prejudice that she couldn't see the most important legal figure in the county standing 6 feet in front of her. Wagner let out a small, strangled sound. Her eyes rolled back slightly, and she stumbled, catching herself on her high-backed chair before sinking into it. She was no longer a judge. She was a small, terrified old woman. Judge Hoffman stepped forward, taking full command. Judge Wagner, he ordered, you will recess this court. Now. Wagner fumbled for her gavel, her hand shaking so violently she could barely grasp it. She lifted it, but it was Darius Washington she was staring at. Court is recessed, she whispered. She banged the gavel, not with a crack, but with a weak, defeated thud. She didn't walk to her chambers. She fled. She scrambled from her chair and disappeared through the side door, her black robes flapping behind her like the wings of a broken crow. The second the door slammed shut, the courtroom erupted. The gallery buzzed with 100 frantic whispers. Ben Carter was already on his feet, halfway up the aisle, dialing his editor. Bailiff, Hoffman barked. Clear this courtroom, now, everyone out! Gibbons and the other deputies, energized by Hoffman's authority, began herding the stunned onlookers out. Ms. Shapiro, Hoffman said, his tone softening. Mr. Carter, please wait in the hallway. I will speak with both of you in a moment. Ms. Shapiro, you have my profound apologies. And my thanks. You showed admirable courage. Anna Shapiro, still in shock, just nodded. Hoffman turned to the man of the hour. Mr. Washington, my chambers. Please. 10 minutes later, they were in Judge Hoffman's palatial office, a room filled with leather-bound books and portraits of stern-faced men. Hoffman was pacing, his face still red with rage. A disaster, Darius, Hoffman said, using his first name. A complete, 5-alarm, procedural and ethical catastrophe. I knew Mildred was traditional. I knew she was a hard-liner. I had heard whispers. But this was clan meeting level racism, in the open. Darius Washington was sitting in a leather armchair, finally sipping a cup of water a clerk had brought him. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a cold, familiar exhaustion. Judge, Darius said, his voice quiet. With all due respect, this isn't about me. I'm fine. I have a title. I have power. I have you. He leaned forward. This is about the man who was before me, and the woman who will be after me. What happens to the people who walk into that courtroom, who look like me, but aren't the new Chief Prosecutor? What happened to them at 9:15? What would have happened to me at 9:45 if you hadn't walked in? He looked Hoffman in the eye. She didn't just sentence me to 48 hours in jail, Judge. She sentenced a type. She was willing to destroy a man's life, get him fired, and give him a record over a parking ticket, because he didn't look the way she thought he should look. Hoffman stopped pacing. He stared at Darius, the anger on his face hardening into something more resolute. He knew what Darius was saying was the absolute, unvarnished truth. The real crime hadn't been the insult to Darius Washington, the new chief. The crime had been against the very concept of justice. You are 100% correct, Hoffman said. He walked to his desk and picked up the phone. Get me Helen Rivers at the Commission on Judicial Conduct, he said to his assistant. Tell her it's an emergency, a code red emergency. He hung up. Mildred Wagner is not just getting a suspension, Darius. I'm going to make sure she never sits on a bench in this state again. Her reign is over. Today. The hard karma for Judge Mildred Wagner was not a single, swift execution. It was a slow, meticulous, and public dismantling. It was death by 1,000 procedural cuts, each one delivered with the cold precision of the law she claimed to uphold. It began that afternoon. By 3 p.m., Judge Leonard Hoffman had filed a 12-page formal complaint with the State Commission on Judicial Conduct, JCCC. By 3:05 p.m., Judge Wagner was served with a notice of immediate suspension, with pay, pending a full investigation. She was ordered to surrender her keys, her courthouse ID, and her caseload. She was escorted from the building by the very marshals she used to command. But the real damage had been done by Ben Carter, the reporter. His story, published on the Kings County Chronicle website by lunchtime, was a nuclear explosion. Headline: Judge Wagner sentences new chief prosecutor to jail for a parking ticket. Sources allege pattern of extreme bias. The story was brutal. It had quotes. It had the docket number. It had Anna Shapiro's statement, given from the hallway. I tried to tell her. She wouldn't listen. She called him a liar. She called me a liar. This wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. The story went national by nightfall. The cable news networks picked it up. Photos of the stern-faced, silver-haired Wagner were juxtaposed with the strong, professional photos of Darius Washington. The narrative was inescapable. Old racist power versus new, progressive justice. Wagner, humiliated and terrified, hired a high-priced defense attorney, a notorious shark named Preston Howell. Howell immediately went on the offensive, releasing a statement that Judge Wagner deeply regretted the administrative error, but that she had been dealing with a difficult and disruptive defendant who refused to identify himself. This was a fatal mistake. The very next day, Judge Hoffman, in his capacity as presiding judge, authorized the release of the official court transcript and the low-quality, black-and-white security footage from the courtroom. The transcript was damning. "Mr. Washington, Your Honor, I am an officer of the court. I was just trying to—" Judge Wagner: "You are not an officer of the court. You are a defendant. How dare you impersonate a lawyer?" The video was worse. It didn't have clear audio, but the body language was unmistakable. Wagner's furious, dismissive gestures, Anna Shapiro's desperate pleading, Darius Washington's impossible calm, and finally, Wagner's pointing finger as she ordered him to jail. The JCRC, facing immense public and political pressure, fast-tracked the hearing. Darius Washington, now installed in the Chief Prosecutor's office, was the first witness. He did not come in guns blazing. He was somber, precise, and devastating. "It was not her anger that concerned me," he stated under oath. "It was her certainty. She didn't check a file. She didn't ask a question. She knew what I was. In her mind, the facts were irrelevant. My failure to appear was not a clerical error. It was a character flaw inherent to my appearance." She saw a black man in a rumpled suit, and her entire judicial process was dictated by that single, prejudiced assumption. The next witness was Anna Shapiro. She came with receipts. "We, the public defenders, we call her the Mauler, or 32nd Mildred, because that's how long a non-white defendant gets before she makes up her mind." Shapiro's testimony, guided by the JCC's counsel, was the true beginning of the end. She presented case files. Case 44C, People v. Rodriguez, a Hispanic man, 19 years old, shoplifting a $40 video game. First offense. The standard is probation and community service. Judge Wagner gave him 90 days in county jail. That same afternoon, Case 44D, People v. Stewart, a white college student, 20 years old, shoplifting a $200 textbook. First offense, Judge Wagner told him to not disappoint his parents again, and dismissed the case. She presented 12 such cases, all from the last 6 months. The pattern was undeniable. The final witness was the bailiff, Frank Gibbons. He was terrified, sweating in his dress uniform. "Mr. Gibbons," the JCC counsel asked, "did you at any point try to warn Judge Wagner?" Gibbons looked at Wagner, who was sitting beside her lawyer, looking grey and frail. "Yes, sir," Gibbons said, his voice thick. I recognized Mr. Washington. Not right away, but it clicked from the internal memos about the new DA. I tried to approach the bench. She slapped my hand away. She told me to handle the defendant. She has a look. We all know it. When she gets that look, you don't argue. I've seen her ruin careers. I was afraid. Afraid of what, Mr. Gibbons? Of her, he said, simply. We all were. The case of Judge Mildred Wagner, JCC docket number 2204, was not a quiet internal review. It was a 2-week public spectacle. The hearing room, normally a drab, bureaucratic space, was overflowing. Every seat was taken by reporters, courthouse staff, lawyers, and citizens who had, for years, whispered about Wagner's cruelty, and now came to see the Queen held to account. Mildred Wagner sat at the respondents' table, a ghost of her former self. The severe bun was gone, replaced by limp, thinning silver hair. She wore a simple grey suit, her hands clasped so tightly on the table that her knuckles were white. Beside her sat Preston Howell, her attorney. He was everything she was not: vibrant, aggressive, and utterly without shame. He was a notorious shark, a man who specialized in defending the indefensible, and he seemed to relish the challenge. "This is not a hearing, it's a witch hunt," he declared in his opening statement, his voice booming. "It is a public lynching, fueled by a media mob and a woke agenda, all aimed at destroying the career of a woman who has given 50 years of her life to the law." Howell's strategy was one of scorched earth. He did not defend Wagner's actions. He attacked the character of everyone who dared to report them. His cross-examination of Anna Shapiro was brutal. "Ms. Shapiro," he sneered, "isn't it true you're a social justice advocate? Isn't it true you've been disciplined twice for overly zealous advocacy in Judge Wagner's courtroom? Isn't this just your personal vendetta, a way to get back at a judge who simply didn't buy your client's sob stories?" Anna held her ground. "I was disciplined for filing motions to reconsider, Mr. Howell, and I'll file them again every time I see a 19-year-old sent to jail for a first offense candy bar." His attack on Frank Gibbons, the bailiff, was just as vicious. "You were afraid?" Howell mocked. "You, a sworn deputy, with a firearm on your hip, were afraid of a 70-year-old woman? Or isn't it true, Mr. Gibbons, that you simply failed in your duty? That you saw a tense situation and, rather than de-escalate, you panicked? You're blaming her for your own incompetence." Gibbons, sweating in the hot seat, simply shook his head. "I wasn't afraid of her. I was afraid of her power. There's a difference." But Howell saved his most potent venom for the man who wasn't there. Darius Washington, who had already given his calm, devastating testimony on day one. "Mr. Washington is the new Chief Prosecutor," Howell argued in his closing, pacing before the commission. "He is, by definition, the most powerful lawyer in the county. Are we to believe he was a helpless victim? He never said, 'Judge, I am the new Chief Prosecutor, Darius Washington.' He played a game. He was coy. He said, 'I am an officer of the court.' A vague, almost tricky phrase. Why? Why would he do that unless he wanted this confrontation? He set a trap. He wanted to make an example of her. He wanted to humiliate this old-school judge to clear the way for his new regime. It was a bold, conspiratorial narrative, and it backfired spectacularly. The JCC's lead counsel, Maria Chen, a sharp, precise woman whose quiet demeanor concealed a steel trap of a mind, rose for her rebuttal. She walked to the lectern, not with Howell's theatricality, but with a heavy file in her hands. "Mr. Howell's defense is fascinating," she began, her voice calm. "He has painted Anna Shapiro as a radical, Frank Gibbons as a coward, and the most powerful prosecutor in the state as a tricky victim. His entire argument is that the problem isn't Judge Wagner's documented, proven bias, but that her victims were not polite enough in the face of it. He is, to be blunt, blaming the victims of the bias for the bias itself. It is frankly disgusting." She then turned to the file. "But Mr. Howell is right about one thing. This case is not just about Darius Washington. He was just the man who had the power to turn on the lights. Let's talk about what was happening in the dark." This was the moment. She produced the report from Dr. Patel, the statistician. "Mr. Howell calls Judge Wagner tough and old school. The data calls her a bigot." She projected the numbers onto a screen. "We analyzed 5 years of sentencing data. Judge Wagner's sentencing for non-violent misdemeanor infractions for minority defendants is, on average, 350% higher than the district average, 350%. That isn't tough. That's a mathematical certainty of prejudice. A low gasp came from the gallery. One of the commissioners, a stern-faced former appellate judge, slowly removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Let's talk about the charge she levied against Mr. Washington," Chen continued. "Contempt of court. A tool meant to preserve the dignity of the room. In Judge Wagner's hands, it was a weapon. Her contempt of court charges, the ones she issues from the bench, are levied against non-white individuals at a rate of 9-1. She let the number hang in the air. This is not tough. This is a system of abuse. This is a judge who has, for at least a decade, run her courtroom as a personal fiefdom where the color of your skin determines the weight of her gavel." Chen looked directly at the 7 commissioners. The Washington incident was not an aberration. It was the culmination. It was not a mistake. It was a pattern. The only difference between Darius Washington and the hundreds of others who stood before her is that he had a title. He was the one she couldn't break. He was the day she finally got caught. The commission deliberated for 3 agonizingly long days. On the final day, the room was silent. Judge Mildred Wagner was ordered to appear. She walked in, leaning on her lawyer's arm, and stood before the panel. She looked frail, shrunken, her eyes darting nervously around the room she once would have commanded. The JCC chairman, a retired state Supreme Court justice named Everett Price, a man known for his profound, almost mournful solemnity, put on his reading glasses. He did not look at her. He read from the document in his hands. "This commission has investigated the events of October 27th, as well as the comprehensive judicial record of Judge Mildred Wagner." His voice was a deep, resonant bass that filled every corner of the room. "We have found a pattern of behavior that is not just alarming. It is shocking. Judge Wagner has wielded her immense power, not as a scalpel for justice, but as a hammer of personal, deeply rooted prejudice." He finally looked up, his eyes peering over his glasses, and for the first time, he addressed her directly. "Your actions on that day, madam, were not a mistake, as your counsel has argued. They were the predictable, inevitable product of a bias that you have allowed to fester and guide your hand for years. You failed to see a man. You failed to see a lawyer. You failed to uphold your most sacred, fundamental, and simple duty, to be impartial." He paused. "You saw only color, and you acted on that prejudice with the full, terrifying power of the state." Wagner let out a small, choked sob. Howell put a hand on her back, but it was a useless gesture. "Therefore," the chairman continued, "it is the unanimous decision of this commission, based on the overwhelming weight of the evidence and the testimony of Dr. Patel, Ms. Shapiro, Mr. Gibbons, and Mr. Washington, that Judge Mildred Wagner be permanently removed from the bench of the Kings County Superior Court, effective immediately." The words hit like a physical blow. Permanent removal, the end of everything. But the chairman wasn't finished. "Furthermore, she is hereby barred from holding any judicial or state-appointed office for life. Her name will be stricken from the bar of this state." Another blow. She couldn't even practice law. "And finally," he said, his voice dropping, "as per the state's judicial malfeasance clause, which is invoked in cases of gross negligence and willful misconduct, all state-funded pension and retirement benefits are forfeited." This was the end. It was a professional death sentence, a financial execution, a total and complete nullification of her entire life. Wagner's legs buckled. She didn't just cry, she collapsed, slumping against Preston Howell, who had to physically hold her up. The sound she made was a roar, animal wail of despair. The hard karma was absolute. She lost her title. She lost her power. She lost her reputation. She lost her future. The Wagner name, once a source of judicial royalty in the county, was now a permanent stain, a synonym for disgrace, a footnote in law school textbooks on how not to be a judge. The mauler of courtroom 3B had been, in the end, mauled by the very system she thought she owned. 1 month later, courtroom 3B was a different world. It was no longer a kingdom of cold shadows. It was just a room. The first thing Darius Washington had requested upon taking office, a request Judge Hoffman had gleefully signed off on, was the removal of the heavy, moth-eaten velvet curtains that had suffocated the windows for decades. Now, bright, unfiltered November light flooded the space, revealing dust motes dancing in the air and the scuffs on the floor that Wagner's perpetual twilight had once concealed. The room felt different. The oppressive metallic tang of fear was gone, replaced by a nervous, chaotic energy. The high, intimidating bench sat empty, a relic. The new presiding judge for this department, a sharp, energetic woman named Judge Pena, had opted to use a simple, lower desk set up on the main floor, closer to the council tables. Today, the room was being used for arraignments, and the atmosphere was almost conversational. Public defenders, who used to stand rigid with dread, now argued motions with vigor. Young assistant district attorneys, hired by Darius's new administration, were present, their binders filled with new directives on bail reform and diversion programs. The old guard ADAs, the ones who had thrived under Wagner's tough-on-crime regime, looked visibly uncomfortable, like men forced to wear ill-fitting suits. But the most profound change was not in any single courtroom. It was happening 3 floors up, in the Chief Prosecutor's office, and it was about to radiate through the entire building. Darius Washington stood at a podium in the courthouse press room. The room was packed, a sea of cameras and microphones. In the front row, Ben Carter, the reporter who had broken the story, held his pen at the ready. In the back, standing against the wall, was Anna Shapiro. She wasn't here by accident. Darius had personally invited her. Darius's suit was immaculate. His tie was perfect. His face, however, was not one of triumph. It was the face of a man about to begin a marathon. His voice was steady as he addressed the room. "Good morning," he began. "1 month ago, on my first day in this building, I had an illustrative experience. I was not here as a prosecutor. I was here as a defendant, and I witnessed, from that unique vantage point, a complete and total breakdown of justice." A low murmur rippled through the press corps. "It was a personal experience," he continued, "but I have learned in the past 30 days that it was not a unique one. For far too long, justice in Kings County has been a matter of luck. It has depended on the mood of a judge, the color of your skin, the quality of your suit, or the name on your ID badge. It cannot depend on whether the defendant happens to be the new DA. Justice must be a guarantee." He paused, letting the words sink in. He looked directly into the main camera, his gaze unblinking. My predecessor's office was, by all accounts, focused on one thing: convictions, high conviction rates, tough sentences. That is a simple, and ultimately, a hollow, metric for success. It says nothing of fairness. It says nothing of righteousness. It says nothing of justice. An office that pursues victory at the expense of justice is not a prosecutor's office. It is an instrument of oppression. He gestured to a newly printed sign behind him. That is why, today, I am formally announcing the formation of the Kings County Conviction Integrity Unit. A shockwave, palpable and audible, went through the room. This wasn't just a new policy. This was a revolution, Reporters were already texting their editors. A conviction integrity unit, CIU, was a declaration of war on the old way of doing things. It was an admission that the system had been wrong. The CIU, Darrow said, his voice rising in command, will be an independent division within this office. Its sole purpose will be to investigate and remedy past wrongful convictions and instances of clear, systemic injustice. And its first task, its first order of business, will be a comprehensive, top-to-bottom review of every felony conviction and every summary contempt ruling issued by former Judge Mildred Wagner for the last 10 years. The room erupted. Shouted questions, the flash of cameras, the scrambling of feet. This was it. This was the karma. It wasn't just that Wagner was gone, he was digging up the roots of her entire toxic legacy. Darius held up a hand. I will take questions in a moment. But let me be clear. This is not a witch hunt. This is a search for facts. This is about finding every person who was sentenced, not on evidence, but on bias. It's about finding every People versus Rodriguez, a case you'll soon learn about, where a 19-year-old was jailed for 90 days for a first offense, while a white student on the same day had his case dismissed for the same crime. He then looked to the back of the room, finding Anna Shapiro in the crowd. And we will not be doing this alone. This review will be conducted in full partnership with the Kings County Public Defender's Office. He nodded to Anna. Ms. Shapiro, who so courageously stood for her client a month ago, has agreed to co-chair the review panel. This office will no longer view the public defenders as adversaries, but as partners in the pursuit of a just outcome. Anna Shapiro, stunned, could only nod, a small, weary but profoundly grateful smile on her face. Ben Carter looked from Darius to Anna and back, scribbling furiously. He understood. This wasn't just a press conference. It was the signing of a new constitution for Kings County. The hard karma, Ben realized, wasn't just the removal. It wasn't the lost pension. It wasn't the humiliation. This was the hard karma. It was the methodical, public, and righteous erasure of her work. It was the unwinding of her every cruel decision. It was the ultimate pronouncement that her entire career had been a failure, a stain to be scrubbed clean. Later that evening, the courthouse was quiet. The press was gone. The buzzing energy of the day had settled. Darius walked down the main hall of the second-floor gallery, his footsteps the only sound on the marble. He passed the grand, oil-painted portraits of the courthouse's former presiding judges, a long line of stern, pale-faced men. He stopped. He was standing in front of a blank space on the wall. It was where Mildred Wagner's portrait had hung. By order of the JCC, it had been removed, crated, and sent to her lawyer's office. All that remained was a faint, dusty rectangle on the flocked wallpaper, and a single, naked brass hook. Darius stared at the empty space. He felt no triumph. He felt no joy. He felt no satisfaction. He felt only the immense, crushing weight of the work ahead. He thought of the hundreds, maybe thousands, of files the CIU would have to read, the lives that were broken, the families that were shattered, the years that were stolen, all by the woman whose likeness had hung right here. The empty space wasn't a victory, it was an indictment. Mr. Washington, sir. Darius turned. It was Frank Gibbons, the bailiff, finishing his rounds. He held his hat in his hands, his gaze respectful and slightly awestruck. Frank, Darius replied, his voice quiet. Gibbons nodded toward the empty space on the wall. Good riddance, if you ask me. Some of the old-timers are grumbling, but not me, not the ones who had to, stand there and watch. He then looked at Darius, his expression earnest. What you're doing, sir, with the new unit, reviewing her cases. He swallowed, his throat working. It's good, sir. It's right. It's the rightest thing I've seen happen in this building in 20 years. Darius looked from the bailiff back to the empty wall. He thought of the man he was just a month ago, standing in his rumpled suit, being sentenced to jail. He thought of the fear and resignation he had seen in the eyes of the other defendants in the holding cell. "It's just the start, Frank," Darius said. He straightened his tie, the simple motion a reaffirmation of his new role. "It's a long way to go." He left the bailiff standing there. He turned his back on the empty, dusty rectangle and walked toward his office at the end of the hall. His footsteps were firm and measured, echoing in the grand, silent space, the sound of a new kind of authority in the King's County Courthouse. Not the brittle, cruel authority of judgment, but the heavy, enduring authority of justice. This story is a stark reminder that the worst prejudices can hide behind the most powerful symbols, a judge's robe, a position of authority. Judge Wagner thought her power made her untouchable, but she forgot one crucial thing. The truth always has a way of coming to light. And when it did, the karma that hit her wasn't just swift, it was total. She didn't just lose her job, she lost her entire legacy, which is now being dismantled as a monument to her own bigotry. What did you think of Judge Wagner's outrageous abuse of power? What was the most satisfying moment of her downfall? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you believe that justice should be blind, and that no one, no matter how powerful, is above the law, then like this video and share it with anyone who needs to see karma in action. And if you love stories where arrogance and prejudice get the ending they deserve, make sure you subscribe to our channel and ring that bell. We have new stories coming for you every week.